Hello folks, I hope that you're having just a great day today. Did you know that Robert E. Howard wrote a bunch of stories that were boxing stories? He did. He actually was one, he wrote not just speculative fiction in the pulp era when he was a big writer, but he actually wrote westerns and he wrote stories in the pulps in the boxing genres. Now there were a lot of subgenres in the pulp era that may not be as popular today. There were flighting pulps where you were flying airplanes and battling with other people in the skies. That was a popular style of pulp. And there were a number of magazines dedicated to those called Wings, Aces, or something like that. That would typically be in the title of the pulp. There were sports pulps, particularly the racing pulps and the boxing pulps that were both big versions of sports genres that you would see pulps dedicated to. You had westerns, obviously. So you had a number of these popular pulps. And Robert E. Howard didn't just write speculative fiction, fantasy, horror, or science fiction for places like Weird Tales or Strange Tales. He actually wrote a lot of stuff as well. And he was a very prolific writer for things outside of his normal collections. And this collection collects all of his boxing stuff, including poems and that sort of thing. So you can buy this collection, and I'll link you to it in the comments below in case you're interested in it. Now, I basically did this with my Solomon Kane stuff. I'm republishing this not on one of my 3 days of the week, Sunday, Tuesday, or Thursday, when I'm publishing my videos for y'all, outside of that normal review schedule for you, so that way you'll know about the boxing stories, and so you can buy it ahead of time if you want to get caught up and kind of follow along with you. But here's the question: does the boxing stories by Robert E. Howard belong in my stuff? Isn't that an interesting question? Remember that I kind of want to unpack horror, science fiction, or fantasy for you, right? And this is boxing stories by Robert E. Howard. Does it count as a part of the things that my channel really wants to invest itself in? Well, let's take a conversation about that then. I was reading a short story by Robert E. Howard that was set in the Conan universe with our hero Conan the Barbarian in it. And in this short story, and remember, Robert E. Howard stuff, fantasy stuff, almost always has very low fantasy. You're going to be, and so there was a Conan story I was reading by the man, starring Conan, where the bad guys were all humans, normal humans. They weren't enhanced, they weren't magical, they weren't using spells or anything like that, using slingers. They weren't beasts, they weren't magically summoned creatures like demons. They weren't a creature at a time like a saber-toothed tiger. None of that. And his allies weren't either, and he was just fighting with normal swords. There were no items, no magical items, artifacts, or giant spiders that they had to overcome early on in the adventure, or anything like that. It was nothing in it that was fantasy. But it was by Robert E. Howard, and it was in Conan the Barbarian. If I reviewed that short story for you, I don't think anybody would object. I don't think anybody would say, "Hey, Abe, I thought your channel was about fantasy, science fiction, and horror." It is. But I don't think anybody would object because it's by Robert E. Howard, who's one of the giants of speculative fiction, particularly fantasy, and in the Conan genre too. So it has two sort of ways of hanging on to its speculative fiction, right? It's fantasy. It's by Howard, and it's Conan the Barbarian. Well, if you remove one of those and it's still by Howard, does it count? I'm going to make the argument that it actually does count, and I'm going to take a look at it. Now, I haven't read any of these short stories in the boxing collection, so it's very possible I may only read one or two and then be like, okay, I've read enough, and I may not do a whole deep dive into it for you, or I might do 3 or 4 of them that are the best, and then, so that you'll kind of get your feet wet. So I leave myself open to be organic with it, because you never know what's going to end up happening once you start kind of taking a deep dive into things. So I do want to be organic about it, but yeah. I want to start taking a look at some of his boxing stories as a part of this channel. He's a great writer. He's a gifted writer. He wrote a lot more than people give him credit for. Now, one thing about Robert E. Howard, and then I'll leave you to it, as a reminder, I consider him one of the 4 pillars of modern fantasy. And I have actually done a video where I take a look at the 4 pillars: Tolkien, Howard, Gygax, and Moorcock, and how they have each 4 contributed to the modern sort of way of seeing fantasy. So I'll link you to that video below, because I think that this guy is a giant in the fantasy field, and we need to make sure that we're giving him credit for it. So there you are. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. Yep, this guy did boxing stories. Hey, if you like this video, please feel encouraged to hit that subscribe button. There's going to be a lot more of these to follow, including some boxing stories by Robert E. Howard. And then finally, hey, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day and watching my video. We all have so many things that are happening in our lives, right? And we're being pulled in so many different directions, especially by modern media. So the fact that you spent this time with me, man, that's humbling. And I appreciate it. So thanks again and have a great day.